Hello, it's day 161 of 365 days towards racial change. My name is Tom Lynn's not back. We're here talking about black issues in America. I just had a comment, and I usually don't respond too much in this way, but it's a detractor. It says slavery is over, slavery is done and dead in America. I think we can find some arguments for and against his position. We'll see as we continue our trek through history, politics, economics, social life, existence, law enforcement, vocational life, business life, understanding money, business entities. So we're going to look at everything in America, dissect it, look at it, and see the nature of slavery and its existence. I'm 161 days deep into this, so you may know my feelings on the issue, but we're going to look inside some of my arguments. I grant I'm limited and biased in a certain way, so I'm just presenting my proofs as I see fit. So that's what we're doing. Black issues in America, maybe not slavery proper, I don't sleep on a dirt floor with a mat of hay, as some of my forebears probably did in America. I know on my father's side, uh, I'm descended from slaves, the group compelled, exploited in America, and I believe it continues today in various forms. So two big thoughts, on that note emerge. First thought has two parts. First part is, does the slave mind exist? Is the slave mind so conditioned in this overarching white system created by whites, for whites, administered by whites to such a degree that it doesn't even know it's enslaved? Is that possible for slavery? I know I want to use this illustration. I've had my issues with drugs and alcohol, and I was just talking to a friend, we'll say, today about the point in my life where I realized I had gone crossed the line in addiction, alcoholism circles. They talk about, you cross an invisible line into addiction, but when you cross it, you're not aware of it, and it was a big turning point in my life. The addictions continued, but I had crossed the line, and I didn't even know I was trapped into a cycle of life that was going to last more than two more decades in my life. That's the nature of denial and the mind. So the black mind, can it be, can the black mind, black individuals be enslaved and not know it, even here, 2019? Other side of the same coin, that the second vein under the thought of our cognition and our mind is, does the white mind, privilege, power, expectation of favor, moving in and out in America in the way the majority of white folks move, and this is just my experience. I don't have to throw you stats or anything. I ride the train. I see the privilege, um, in which white folks move about. I'm all for it. It's okay. They've earned some of that space to a degree, but in their minds, are they just on automatic pilot about um, ownership of the world, so to speak? Now, I think we can find some arguments for and against that here. Now, the second thought is for financial literacy among black folks, understanding business models understanding taxation, understanding some of the long-term impacts of inflation, understanding inflation uh, 20, 30 years from now, and uh, putting our finances, situating our finances to address the devaluation of our dollars in America, understanding international uh, financial policies. We don't need a doctorate in macroeconomics, international finance, the Federal Reserve, and things like that. We just want to have some some rudimentary ideas. We need to be outside the box, I believe, financially as Black folks, because we are not, I think, as a group, handling our dollars properly. You know, we could focus our dollars and find ourselves just as potent financially, economically, as some of the other groups that have found a way to stay together, stick together. And other groups, I mean Hispanics, Arabs, Asians, whites, of course. The Hmong group is rising up in America. So uh, us Black folks are so diluted in our financial focus, we're not talking to each other about these things. And so I'm situated in my life. I have a lot of um, white counselors in my life. You know, I'll say it, I've said it many times. This is not a hate channel or project to hate a group. What we're looking at, how can we as Black folks be just as effective, you know, in a system created by whites, administered by whites, for whites, and all these things. And we examined a whole lot of stuff for the past 160 days. So, you know, uh, please comment, chime in, yay or nay, either way, I'm all for it. It's going to still love you the best I can. I'm still a blue collar guy. I don't make money. I welcome every and all comers. I'm inspired though by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. Uh, he's much more eloquent with these issues. He's studied. He's done the research about Black groups' vulnerability, and there's many other writers too. He references a lot of other works and other writers, but I stick to this man a lot. I like the way he says what he says about where Black people are at in America. I've read 3 of his works, and we're in one of his resources today. His name is Dr. Claude Anderson, and he's written 3 great works. And his resume includes helping presidents get elected, involved with the Board of Education in 2 or 3 states, internationally traveled. He's not just a guy like me talking about stuff. He knows his work. Black History Reader, this is the one book you want to get if you just want to get one thing. It gives you good cross section of the Black plight in America. A lot of history, a lot of historical stuff in there. Some stuff I didn't know about. Please get it. Also, I read Black Labor, White Wealth. We are going through a few days of this, talking about uh, we're talking about why and how Blacks are institutionally in the position that they are in America. And finally, Dr. Anderson's National Plan to Empower Black America, Powernomics. Um, these resources are a few years old and whatnot, because there's not been a whole lot of, there's no grand movement. I know there are little pockets of resistance out there, but I'm looking for a overall revival of Black folks, which is problematic. If you understand terms like meritorious manumission and black behavior, there's some issues with the group coming together and all that through conditioning, present issues, all this stuff. Now, on that note, you can find Dr. Anderson at powernomics.com and the Heritage Institute in Washington, D.C. Behind me, you'll see the hashtag #US2 symbol. As black women, they're supporting one another, having their conversation. Check out Black Enough, BLAGGENUF. It's not so much, it's a kind of a black Facebook, but I haven't checked on it lately, but it's not about uh, black liberty and things like that. You know, some of the about freedoms and things like that. Some of those polarized issues that I'm talking about here. Let's see. This is the World Wide Web. If you can't find your flavor or your people, then create your own. You know. But I can think you just Google your mind, and Google will find whatever it is you're interested in, I'm sure. Finally, what I think is important, we take a look at it's a fictional life of slave life in America in the mid-1800s. Harriet Beecher Stowe's phenomenal work, Uncle Tom's Cabin, very important. Um, have that in your bibliography because it's another way we look at fictional accounts, but we can elaborate on their factual basis. Very important. All right, day 161, where this is slavery as peculiar, part 2. And yesterday we talked about um, how slavery in America was exploitation, slave exploitation on steroids in America. These white European colonials really took such advantage. They severed the ties from England and pushed off that oppression, which was nothing compared to what they turned 180 degrees and did to black people in America by shipping them from whatever means. You know, there may be evidence of cooperation with tribal chiefs and the economics of uh, gathering slaves from Africa and bringing them here, conditioning black folks to be obedient. They use whatever means, violence, probably the top one, with the whippings, brandings, and things like that. But there were also mental attacks and things like that. So, and it was totally exploitative. We're going to look at just a few issues today of how slavery, um, how it, financially you're filling the pockets of private white citizens, essentially. Although before the Civil War, Dr. Anderson mentions that there were upwards of 6,000 slaves owned by black people. That's how normalized the institution had become. They they excised the moral components, and where black people are owning black people, right? That's heavy duty. There are some elements there that we can argue for that still exist in today's society. So and that's something I'm very vigilant in my own life about looking out for. And just for review, we talked about some stats: 20 to 35 million blacks killed outright. I'm sure many died on that voyage from the west coast of Africa to the east coast of the American shores. 15 million physically enslaved. That population augmented by relationships with white slave masters and their female black slaves to give us mulattoes, octoroons, quadroon folks who were uh, lighter black people, not darker white people. Watch the language there. Any little drop of blackness um, confine that person, consign that individual to a life of slavery. All right, so today the brief notes. Hopefully, the table I recreated Dr. Anderson's table out of Black Labor, White Wealth. Hopefully, that will translate onto your brief notes. If not, hopefully I can massage it a little bit so that you get this contrast and comparison between ancient enslavement versus colonial black enslavement. This is on page 75 of Dr. Anderson's book, Black Labor and White Wealth. 5 points I wanted to look at. He's got 10. I'm sure it's not an exhaustive list. Those are his top 10 probably. Because of time, I picked 5. Not necessarily even the top 5. First one we talked about was how slavery in ancient times was temporary. An unfortunate social condition is what he has, and which is kind of true. Slavery before America got a hold of it, and no, slavery is alive today in other nations, in other places. There's human trafficking, things like that. There's a lot of things Americans are shielded from in our sensibilities, but slavery is still alive today. So, but in but overall, I don't think it's as brutal and exploitative as American slavery, but it was temporary, unfortunate social condition. They were a slave in Rome or in Greece. You know, could be in that condition. We're going to look at some of the reasons why they could be in that condition. They weren't just born in that condition as readily as American slavery was. It was easier to maneuver out of slavery. There was more a respect. Now slavery. I mean, you say slave, it's not a good circumstance for the person on the receiving end of slavery. The person administering the slavery is probably getting off pretty well, but the person receiving the slavery, they're compelled. It's slavery. It's being compelled to live life for someone else, living your life other than you would rather have it lived. So it's stripping away of your personal freedom. For that reason, I think slavery is very much alive today. I got to hurry up, get done this video because I got to crash and go to work tonight. I would not be working at night. That's kind of the best thing going. And I'm got to maneuver myself to get in a situation where I could experience more freedom and choose my own path. But that's coming. I got some little hurdles to go over. But that's, slavery's being compelled to live in a way other than you would have. Now, conversely, black slavery is permanent and inherited. If I'm back in the 1800s, or at really almost any time in America, my offspring, my children, they're going to share my same fate, regardless of their academic capacity, physical levels, and all that stuff. They're still going to be compelled to share my fate. They're not going to be self-determining their pathway in the world. Second thing came out, the governments of the world, ancient world, did not use their power to put slaves in a position to enrich private citizens. Very important. The slave was a slave, of course. They were the property, intellectual property, physical property of the private owner. But the government wasn't sanctioning uh, this institution against the slaves. Very specific. Now, in America, we've talked in the past about slavery hidden in the Constitution, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison back in their behind the scenes brainstorming and using specific, explicit slave language um, to determine the outcome for a specific group of people in America based on the color of their skin, you know, slaves. Now, other people, they mentioned Native Americans openly, immigrants openly, things like that as the Constitution and the founding documents become more public. But in their text, on the inside, black slaves are mentioned explicitly as the text gets more public. They talk about the unhappy lot and unfortunate people and things like that. Those are the slaves. And specifically, the founding documents explicitly say that blacks do not participate in the wealth privileges of white America. You have it explicitly in some of Maryland's documents, 1600s. We've talked about that. That blacks won't participate in white wealth. I'm just paraphrasing there. Remember Dred Scott decision. Black men will not black men will have no rights that white men will respect. That kind of language in the Supreme Court. So we've got to think about that, how the government in America sanctions the exploitation of a black group for the specific purpose of enriching their the white slave holders. That was a new thing in the world. This enriching the slave holder specifically. Moving on, slaves are debtors, prisoners of war, religious persecution. Right, there was some reason for that individual to receive slavery, not some automatic. Not you see this person with a specific color, walking with a limp, specific sexual orientation. You don't find any of that in uh, ancient slavery, right? It's in ancient slavery they were prisoners of war, or you owed a debt, a great debt. The religious fights and arguments and stuff, you know, then you've got a slave, right? Blacks were enslaved because they were black. It's period. I don't even have to go on in that argument for American slavery. Black, he goes in. And in the notes I put, like, in my times of reaching out for drug and alcohol help, they always ask me, my race, color, or something like that, and that determines where I'm going to go to receive my help. When most of the time, it means I gotta go into the hood where they're selling drugs. There are out liquor stores nearby and all that. But my white counterparts with the same conditions, same circumstances in life, they kind of go in quiet neighborhoods, peaceful, green grass, clean, things like that. I'm in that sense, I'm suffering, almost a brown v. board of education experience where, you know, the black community or challenged communities are not offering what I need, and I'm I'm lobbying to go to some white spaces to find the secure some peace and help as I struggle with an issue. The same thing, you know, for slavery. You know, you're black. You know, you can't get around it. We don't have the internet and ready access to information. I mean, if you remember the movie Roots, they had a guy. Uh, there were a couple instances actually where you know you'd see some men captured heading south, trying to plead their case that they've been kidnapped or you know wrongly taken from their masters, but they're lost. They're being taken south by some greedy guys that just are whipping up a gang of slaves to sell. Money, follow the money. Moving on, slaveholders, you know, allowed their slaves in ancient times to have this sense of individuality, humanity, and all that. In American colonial slavery, slaves were um, psychosocially conditioned, as Dr. Anderson points out. He this conditioning aspect very important. Meritorious manumission. Look that up if you're not familiar with that. Um, that uh, those elements that encourage racial disunity, distrust among black folks, um, the conditioning that says that that would probably say that the black individual is less than. Remember, we talked about in the 23 days of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, one of those individuals, one of those white men was a doctor, thought that the black skin, what was a kind of leprosy on the individual, something treatable, something to be eradicated and worked on. So that I guess he was working on potions to make us white or something, which is crazy because you got millions of white people sitting out on beaches trying to get black. Everybody's confused. We don't know what we're doing. That's that human condition. Uh, so you know, the blacks, the black slave was to have no sense of self, you know, no sense of ownership, no sense of security. You know, in ancient times, this was not necessarily so. Next thing, last thing we'll talk about today, slavery. This again, personal wealth uh, and benefits to slave holders, um, specifically, you know, to a degree, not necessarily sanctioned by the government, as we talked about just a few minutes ago. You know, but it was more localized. The the fruit of the labor of the slave in ancient times. In American slavery, the American slave, those slaves in American colonial times benefited nations over in Europe. All those raw materials would go overseas to be processed in the European spaces. You know, it was just it was just exploitation of individuals on steroids. The labor was essentially free. You know, you keep the slave essentially clothed, essentially healthy, and fed enough to continue, and all that wealth goes to the plantation owner who secures some of that wealth and sends it off overseas to be processed. Remember, and you know, mix in some of the plight of Native Americans because they gave up free land or land that was given away for next to nothing, you know. And on some of that note, blacks are still looking to get this reparations argument revived and very much secured here in America. It's a tough sell. It's been such a long time. You think about interest, think about the Freedmen's Bank, just being financially exploited, uncompensated for labor in America. It's just an ongoing theme. I'm underpaid. Yet I'm functioning at the same level, participating at the same level as the managers where I work at. You know, it's just what I've agreed to, what I'm working with in this present, in my present state, in this present system. So listen, I'm out of time. That was just a quick blurb. Uh, keep writing in, keep uh, asking yourself questions, disagree, agree with me. I want you to first understand the message, understand Dr. Claude Anderson, um, a lot of things, you know. But I'm glad the community is thinking and taking just a moment to hear um, my own personal limited views as they may be. Oh, I also got selected to be at this summit. I'm going to be presenting these issues. I'm probably going to focus on one thing. We're covering such a broad topic here, but I'm going to focus in maybe on one or 2 points. My time will be limited, but I'll keep you posted on how that's coming. This is going to culminate sometime in October. I'm Tom Lynn's Nyback. 365 days towards racial change, day 161 out of the way. I'll see you tomorrow.